Hey WHAPers, I'm Mr. Oleson. This is WHAP. Today we're looking at Key Concept 2.2, which is the development of states and empires in the classical world. Now, before we get started, I'm going to address the elephant in the room. Check out my eye. I am not wearing eyeshadow. I was playing morning basketball with some other teachers this week, and the AP US history teacher came down, caught me with an elbow, and decided he wanted to ruin my videos this week. So, may look a little weird, but the show must go on. We're looking at the development of states and empires in the classical world. There's a lot of new states and a lot of new empires in period 2. You want to make sure that you can compare them. You want to make sure you can think about what changes and stays the same. Why is it that throughout the course of human history, there's this quest to expand our land, to control more people, control more wealth? What happened to my eye? Most historians are going to define empires as large coercive states that control a diverse group of people. Rulers are going to impose political unity in territories that used to have much smaller competing states. Let's look at some examples. In the 6th century BCE, the Persian Empire is going to create the largest empire we've seen yet. And they're going to control territory in Southwest Asia, also known as the Middle East. And as you can see, they're actually going to gobble up the territory that was controlled by 3 of the early river valley civilizations back in period 1. So the Indus River Valley Civilization, the Mesopotamian River Valley Civilization, and the Egyptians are all going to be gobbled up by the Persians. In East Asia, we're going to have extremely large and extremely coercive states develop. The Qin and the Han dynasties are going to control massive amounts of territory in China, and a lot of historians say the first real centralized government that directly controlled mass amounts of territory was actually the Qin dynasty back in 221 BCE. In South Asia, the Maurya and Gupta empires are going to control territory. Although one thing that's interesting is in South Asia, especially because of its cultural and geographical diversity, empires are always going to be a little bit shorter in terms of how long they last and smaller in terms of how much territory they control. So when you think South Asia, you can think kind of weaker states than places like China. The Mediterranean region sees a lot of empires rise and fall in this period. Historically, the Mediterranean Sea actually brings people together, even though today most people think about it as a dividing line. So the Phoenicians, who are famous for developing the world's first alphabetic language, are going to colonize and create empires in the Mediterranean. The famous Greek city-states, the 2 most important ones are Sparta and Athens, are going to colonize the Mediterranean. The Hellenistic kingdoms, which come after the famous empire of Alexander the Great, are going to dominate and build empires in the eastern side of the Mediterranean. And of course, the most famous of all the empires in the classical world are the Romans, who by about the 1st century CE are going to control the entire Mediterranean region. Yes, I do have a shiner. Empire building also exists in the Americas, which is crazy because they're completely isolated. So it shows you how strong this tendency is for humans to develop empires if, even though the people living in the Americas have no examples to look at from Afro-Eurasia, they're still going to develop states in really similar ways. In Mesoamerica, Teotihuacan is an important city-state. Teotihuacan, not Tenochtitlan, Teotihuacan. The famous Mayan city-states are going to thrive from about the 4th century CE to about the 10th century CE. Of course, these classical Mesoamerican civilizations are building off of the Olmecs. In the Andes region in South America, the Moche is thriving at this time. Cahokia and Chaco are 2 key states in North America in this period. They're much smaller than the Andean and Mesoamerican states. In fact, all the way through to Columbus, you should always think about smaller states and more hunter-gathering persisting in North America. These new empires and states are going to develop new techniques of imperial administration based in part on the success of earlier political forms. If you want to get stuff done in such large territories with so many diverse people in them, as governments, you're going to have to come up with new policies and new procedures in order to creatively control all those people. So political bureaucracies and militaries are going to become much more interesting and complicated as new policies and procedures develop to control people. Hey, stop focusing on my eye and start focusing on history. One example of an administrative institution that develops are satraps. Satraps are in the Persian Empire and they are regional governors. So Cyrus and all the Persian kings are going to divide up their empire into provinces. And each of those provinces is going to be led by a satrap, which is basically a provisional governor. And he's going to represent the king in that territory. So he's going to collect taxes and travel along the royal road to report back to the king. Similarly, the Romans had regional governors who could report back to the emperor in Rome. The strongest bureaucracy in the classical world is definitely in China. They're going to invent the civil service exam in order to have the concept of meritocracy pick the best and brightest in their society to work as government officials. Strong militaries were certainly a technique of imperial expansion in this period. The Roman legions were really well organized and sophisticated, and the only way to have true glory in Roman society was to have military glory. The Persians had a really sophisticated, strong military that led to their expansion, and they also had inspectors or spies who worked closely with satraps in order to report back to the king of any potential dissent. The role of the state expands in the classical world. In order to promote trade and project power, states are going to use all sorts of techniques in order to expand their role in societies. States issued currency, developed the practice of diplomacy, controlled supply lines. They built fortifications, built defensive walls, and built elaborate road systems. The Royal Road in the Persian Empire is the first centralized road system that allowed for the development of the very first postal system, and the Roman road network was incredibly sophisticated that linked people all around the Mediterranean world together. Imperial cities are vital to empires. They served as centers of trade, public performance of religious rituals, and political administration. Persepolis, pictured here, was the administrative center of the Persian Empire. Rome was, of course, the capital of the Roman Empire. By the time of Jesus' birth, it had about 1 million people in it, so it was a thriving trade center, a religious center, and a political center. Empires are going to create new social structures because they're bringing new types of people together. So social structures of empires displayed hierarchies that included cultivators, laborers, slaves, artisans, merchants, and caste groups. Imperial societies relied on a range of methods to maintain the production of food and provide rewards for loyalty of elites. Now, one method that becomes more common in these empires is slavery. Slavery is as old as civilization itself. It's going to intensify in many classical societies, in particular in Rome. Now, slavery is not based on race in this period. Most slaves are captured as prisoners of war. In Rome, increasingly they served on the latifundal large estates. Within empires, patriarchy is going to continue to shape gender and family relations. After experiencing so much success, leading up to about 600 CE, all of the major classical empires are going to fall. And one of the most hotly debated topics in history is, why do empires rise and fall the way that they do? The Rome, the Han, the Gupta, they're all going to encounter difficulties with administration, with economics, with problems on their borders that's going to lead to their eventual decline. One problem that certainly the Han and the Romans ran into was the rise of elitism. So with these massive empires occurring, you're going to get a lot more wealth generated. And when you have wealth concentrated in the hands of elites, you're going to create social tensions that can lead to collapse. In the Han Dynasty, the elite landowners are going to start to get more loyalty than the Han emperors themselves, and eventually it's going to break into a warring states period. Security along the frontiers is a major issue that also led to imperial decline. The Xiongnu are a nomadic group that are going to challenge the Han Dynasty along their western borders. Some of you may be thinking of the movie Mulan, which got the nomadic invader part right, but they actually got the wrong group. The Han, we don't think, ever made it up far north enough to challenge the Han. The Han did challenge the Gupta, however, and one of the things that led to their decline in about 550 CE was border invasions from the White Huns. Probably most famously, the Romans had challenges from the Germanic invasions. So the Huns and the Visigoths and the Vandals and a bunch of other groups gave them so many challenges on their borders that it eventually led to their collapse in the year 476. Maybe one easy way for you to remember the challenges of nomadic invasions is how messed up my eye looked. There you go, folks. All you need to know about Key Concept 2.2, the development of key states and empires. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.